we're not actually in charge of our brain. We live in a little part of the brain, but we don't have the final say. That's the problem.
Professor Steve Peters, he's the brain mechanic behind the world's most successful teams and individuals.
He's helped me an awful lot from a personal point of view.
I don't want to be politically correct or incorrect. I'm just going to say what's neuroscience. If you look at the brain, we can simplify it into 3 areas. The chimp brain, it's meant to be defensive. Your job is to decipher what it's telling you and whether it's valid or ridiculous. Once you start learning, you can actually use the chimp system, and then you become extremely resilient. People say to me, Steve, I'm not calm, I'm not confident. And I say, let's get the science right. You are, because you're in charge. But I love the blank piece of paper exercise because it's based on neuroscience. You need to...
What would you say makes these top people, athletes, different?
The first thing I'd say is,
Lots to do. I've just been planning out my day. However, with Revolut as my main account, I've got one less thing to worry about: money. I know my money's safe with Revolut, so I can focus on other important matters like planning a wedding. That is why I pay with Revolut. If Revolut detects anything suspicious with your transfer, you'll receive an in-app warning straight away. And how cool is this? You create a single-use card in the app with just one tap, and then after the purchase is made, your details disappear immediately, so they cannot be reused. Now, if you happen to lose or misplace your card, which is never a fun time for anyone, but a surprisingly regular occurrence for me, you can freeze your card instantly through the Revolut app. And if there's anything I do need help with, Revolut's customer service team are on hand 24/7 via the in-app chat. It is a huge reassurance for me, and just one of the many reasons why Revolut is the main account for all of my finances. But don't just take my word for it. Over 35 million people around the world trust Revolut with their money. Join us and create your account today. Professor Steve Peters has more Olympic medals and world championships to his name than you can count, with accolades in sports from athletics to football, cycling, and snooker. But here's the catch: he hasn't ever played these sports professionally. Instead, he's the brain mechanic behind the world's most successful teams and individuals, from England football to British cycling. In fact, snooker world champion Ronnie O'Sullivan literally credits Peters with his success. His advice was incredible, and I cannot wait for you to listen to this one. It has been such an honor to have such impressive and intelligent people in my office for this podcast, especially recently. I'm completely blown away by the caliber of guests we're getting on and the incredible conversations that I've been able to have. So I really hope you enjoy listening, and thank you so much for all the love you've been giving recently. Please do make sure to rate, to like, and subscribe. It helps us to have these amazing conversations. And I personally cannot wait to have even more. I can't even get over the recent episodes at the moment. Thank you so much for joining me.
thank you for inviting me.
Very excited for this conversation. We've already got into depth about whether they check where doctors are on aeroplanes, because that's particularly something I'm interested in as a human being who likes to know these fun facts. I want to start by getting some context on your career. Okay. For anyone who might not know about your work and who might not know where you've come from in terms of your educational background, in terms of your interests, could you give us a whistle-stop tour of your career background as a whole? Yeah.
So I'm a medical doctor and I specialise in mental health. I worked in forensic psychiatry, so colloquially speaking, people would be calling them psychopaths, serial killers. So I worked in Skew Hospital. But prior to that, I worked in a general hospital. I was clinical director for mental health services and worked with the general public, so dealing with more common illnesses like depression, anxiety states, and so on. Alongside that, I'm an academic, so I work at university. I'm a professor at Sheffield Medical School and was undergraduate dean for many years. And then I say hijacked, that's unfair. I voluntarily got hijacked into the public limelight just by accident and worked in sport. And that put me as a sort of, shop window to the public, which then put me onto television and radio. And from there, I ended up working with basically anybody. So a lot of famous people who it's a privilege to work with anyone for me. So that brought me to here as well. And
so, I mean, that was the most concise I've ever heard anything, especially as kind of extensive as your accolades. In terms of that shooting into the limelight, could you tell us a little bit about who you were working with, how it came to happen?
I think it was I was working, first of all, with the sports teams for Great Britain. But there was a previous student of mine, became a doctor, was on the sports teams, and asked me for an opinion, a psychiatric opinion on an athlete who I can't name because as a doctor, I can only tell you people who give me permission. And from there, I worked with people like Chris Hoy, Vicky Pendleton in the British cycling team, absolute fantastic people. And they were questioning, what are you doing with them? Because I'm not a sports psychologist. I'm out of depth here. I'm a psychiatrist. But my real remit is to help people understand what's going on in their mind so that they can distinguish between themselves and their mind, which sounds a bit strange because you're not your mind. That's like a machine you need to manage. And I did that with sports people. So really, whoever I work with, I ask them what they want. And it doesn't matter what their background is to me. So I can work with doctors, police, teachers, nurses, which I do, or Joe Public. And that could be anybody in corporate work, education, whatever the background they've got.
I hear you have 5 degrees. Could you tell me a little bit about what your 5 degrees are in?
Yeah, it sounds more impressive than it is.
I'm not sure that's true.
Well, I started, I was a teacher initially. When I left school, I liked maths, so I thought it was a nice degree to get. So I took a degree in maths, but I soon realized I really wanted to work with people. So I did a lot of voluntary work in the community and realized a lot of it was medical rather than just helping people. And I didn't have that knowledge. So I went back to medical school, did 5 years, became a doctor. And then as a doctor, because I worked in sport, my defence union said, you really need a degree in sports medicine, even though I said, well, I'm a psychiatrist, I do with the mind. So I had to retrain under physical medicine so that I covered my defence union. But then I was teaching as well. So they said, you really need a degree in medical education. So I did a degree in medical education. So it's needs must. It's not me thinking, I am a bit nerdy, but it's me thinking I have to have this knowledge to help people. So I came really to the world saying, whatever you give me, I need to learn and be able to help you, rather than me saying, I want to get these degrees. So it was inadvertently collecting degrees.
And so filling your perceived gaps in terms of what you wanted to be
Experience
able to help.
and knowledge, because I realized. So for example, when I became generic as an educator in mental health and a university lecturer, there would be areas, in my opinion, that I lacked in, where I would have to go and gain that experience. As doctors, we tend to spread out and learn lots of things en route to where we're going as a consultant. So I covered a lot of things like ADHD, autistic spectrum, but also went into drugs and alcohol clinics, depression clinics. So you learn and you think, well, I need to do this. So I learned quite a lot on neurology, which really started like priming my interest in the neuroscience of the brain, which is where I've now become the specialist.
So you've been described before within that kind of realm as a brain mechanic.
Yes.
I'd love to know, when you see a new patient, what's the first stage of that kind of MOT, to use that?
That's
analogy?
really good. It's an analogy. I gave that because I couldn't think at the time. I'd been thrust into limelight and I was just minding my business, being a doctor in the health service. And then suddenly you've got the press, the national press saying, describe what you do and so on. So I gave the term because when I meet someone the first time, say I met you, the first thing I'll ask is, what is it you would like to walk away with? I usually do an hour. And then I'll say to people, tell me what you want. Sometimes people don't know. But most people will start by saying, I don't want to be anxious, for example, or I don't want to lack confidence. So my first point is to say, let's just correct what I've asked you, because I didn't ask you what you didn't want. Now, that sounds pedantic, but actually it's really important, because if you start with what you don't want, then we don't know where you're going. So I say, people, go again and give me what you really want, a positive. And so if they say, I want to be confident, now I know where we're going. Because there are lots of reasons people lack confidence. So we will investigate that, but the starting point is set sail. Where are we going? So I help people to clarify what they feel would be, in their eyes, a success for the interview. So they go away armed with something. And then the way I do it is to start exploring a lot of areas of the brain. So I simplify the neuroscience because it is extremely complicated, as you can guess. And so for me, who's worked in this for the last 30 plus years, it's second nature. For somebody walking in, I don't want to give them technical terms. So I know we'll come into this. So the first thing is to say, let's look at how your brain functions. What's the structure before we come to the problem? So I don't start by saying, let's look at confidence. I say, now you've told me, we're now going to look at the brain as a machine. And we're going to look particularly the mind as a machine. So it does 3 basic things. I like to simplify so people can say, right, I know what I'm working with. So the brain uses behaviors. So things when people come in and say, I eat too much, I worry too much. These are behaviors they've got. Then there's cognitions or thoughts. So I see myself as less than other people. I see myself as an imposter. I don't like the way I look. My belief is that I don't look nice, or I'm not a nice person. They have all these negative beliefs often. So that's very different to behaviors. So we're going to categorize them. And then finally, we look at emotions. And people don't understand why the brain is giving them emotions. So instead of saying my brain is sending me a message, which is what emotions are, they'll start describing how anxious they are. And I'll say, well, we know that's just your brain or mind telling you there is a problem, you need to address it. So emotion is a way of getting your attention. So that's the mind. So that's what I start looking at and saying, let's have a look at the way your mind is functioning and let's see who you are, because you're very different to your mind.
That's incredibly interesting, and it reminds me of something that I heard recently. I was listening to, I don't know how to pronounce his name, is it Alain de Botton? He was saying about trauma responses from childhood or from as a whole. You know, you've been in one environment and you do something to protect yourself. So
Yes.
whether you're overly funny or whether you pull yourself away or whatever it might be, we often get really frustrated at those responses that we employed in that moment. So say that you have a new relationship and you're finding it really hard to maintain intimacy over time because you pull away or whatever it might be. And I found it so interesting the way he described it, because I think that we obviously see those as negative things, and we see those as something that we want to fix once we've got enough self-awareness to establish that that's something we want to fix. But actually reframing that in a way where he was talking about how, as you say, with emotions, there was an environment in which that response made sense because, you were overly funny because you had a father who was super angry and would respond to you better when you were being funny and lighthearted or whatever it might be. These traits that we have as responses of things, it's just understanding that at one point that made sense. And it's not a negative thing, because at one point that was a defense mechanism. That was something that protected you from something else. It's understanding at what point you move that into an environment where now that response no longer makes sense, and being able to kind of unlearn what that defense mechanism might be. Yeah,
I get where he's coming from. Obviously, people can interpret different ways. So therapists use different models and so on. I'm clearly, as a doctor, I'm coming neuroscience. So a lot of that makes sense. I think what's really crucial now, and before we dive in further, is it's very important to know everyone's unique. That's self-evident, and yet we forget this. So what applies to one person does not apply to the next. So when somebody walks into the room for me, we start with their uniqueness. And I don't know what the person, I know their mind. I can predict what it does. So when you say that, a childhood experience, which almost implies it could do some damage to you, or you could learn a behavior, or it could, in my model, be saying it could be a belief at the time and you reacted on a belief. We need to explore it. But what's important is it was your mind, not you, doing this. And there's a difference between you and your mind. So if, for example, I try and explain, when I started looking at this is 30 years ago, and then scanning people with functional MRI scanners, which part of the brain is thinking and deciding. So the commonest problem people get, and I always revert back to it, is eating. Everybody knows how much they want to eat. Everybody knows what they need to eat. And yet it seems nobody does. We struggle with it as human beings. And this applies to everything now. I don't want to be anxious. I don't want to be. So they start with that. I don't want to lack confidence. And then we say, what do I want? So this isn't making sense. 30 years ago, this dawned on me, especially looking at scanners, that we're not actually in charge of our brain. It's doing what it needs to do. So it's saying, I'm going to eat for pleasure, eat too much, be impulsive. That's how the brain is constructed. We're not constructed that way. As human beings, we live in the little part of the brain, but we don't have the final say. That's the problem. And so when people say, I have eaten too much, I try and reframe that, because scientifically that's not accurate. What you're saying is my mind has made me eat too much. That's very different. You're a recipient of this. Now, it's important that it's not an excuse. You are fully responsible to manage that machine. But before you can do that, you need to understand how it's structured and what you can and can't do. What are the rules of the way the mind works? So if people use inappropriate rules, they don't get very far. So going back to what you've just alluded to about childhood or experience, even in adult life, where we react in a situation. And I'm saying this primitive part of our brain will always react. So you weren't doing anything at that point. It was reacting, because even at the time, if we stopped you and said, is this what you want to be doing? You'd probably take a deep breath and go, no. Which means you're starting to see there are two of you almost in your head. And that's what I started seeing on the scanner. So when I talk to people and calm them down, we see a different part of the brain starting to think, and it doesn't react, it responds to life. So it's a million miles apart. So our brain reacts, we respond. The problem is it has the power. Therefore, we constantly find people beating themselves up. And I'm trying to say, stop looking at it as you doing this. You're saying, what I need to do is look, how do I understand and manage my mind better so that I can be the person I want to be and not have this interference? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And because we're on this topic now, I'd love for you to explain in the way that you set out the theory for anyone who doesn't know what the chimp paradox is.
Okay.
For you to explain that as a kind of cold first time hearing
Very
it.
easy is, if you look at the brain, we can simplify it, still accurate scientifically, into three areas. There are two thinking decision-making areas, and there's a backup system, which is our memory and automatic pilot. So I call the memory automatic pilot an advisory system to the two deciders, a computer system. It just stores our beliefs, and sometimes they can be faulty, and it stores our behaviors, and it takes over for us. So we program ourselves all the time to respond or react in different ways. The two thinking bits were of interest to me. And so simplifying this is, the chimpanzee shares the same system as we do when it reacts impulsively, when it decides on food, when it decides on interactions with other chimpanzees. So the other great apes don't do that. So I was interested over 20, 30 years ago to look at, what can I get from that? If the chimpanzee is doing the same, because it's the same system, that's been published for anyone who wants to, academic listening. In 2018, they published this to show that the great apes, the chimpanzee and human, are very close. So I called that the chimp brain. We're not in control of that. It reacts extremely quickly. And to give some detail to it, it lacks perspective. It's very impulsive. It doesn't think of long-term consequence. It's very short-term gratification. So if you look at the way that that's thinking, if it's you're on a diet and then you decide donuts are out and a donut is placed there, that brain will now literally stop you, because it has the power to do that. And it will just say straight away, right, this is going to taste good. It will think, it's not just a reaction. It will think, what I'll do is exercise twice as much tomorrow. That's what it'll do, which makes sense to it, right? And it doesn't think long-term, I'm going to regret this, even going to bed tonight thinking, what is wrong with me, which is what people do. And so therefore it's impulsive. If we can learn to switch to the human system, now you are in control of this little bit of the brain. And let's say we manage to cage the chimp. It's now not moving. And there are ways of doing it. Then we would sit and look and think, right, the donut may taste nice, but in the long term, it's not good for me. And the bigger perspective, which the chimp hasn't got, that part of the brain can't, is I'm going to regret this, because I'll actually feel much better being healthy and eating the right things than if I keep eating this kind of food. So that's a very black and white example, but I started seeing this with everything. The chimp brain, in chimpanzees and humans, when we operate with that system, it's meant to be defensive. It's meant to be a little bit paranoid, because it's our warning system. So even if we see people talking in a corner, that chimp system will interpret paranoia and think, are they talking about me? Is it negative? Is it the way they said that? That's what it's meant to do. And its job is to now hand you that information. Your job is to decipher what it's telling you and whether it's valid or ridiculous. So the brain has a way of working, and unfortunately, what we're tending to find is the chimp will get anxious about whatever it is, doing a public talk or going into a room where you don't know anybody. It's doing a great job. That's really healthy. It may not be helpful, but it's really normal and healthy. So you should be celebrating. Got a very healthy chimp, right? And then you say, right, you've given me that warning. Now your job is to pick this up. But what I find is people engage the anxiety and the emotion. And as I said earlier, emotion is just a message for you to make a decision and form an action. So, for example, if you're going into a room, you don't know anybody, and your chimp system goes, this is going to be terrible. This is going to be, I'm on edge, and what will they think of me? Which is what it's meant to do. So it's going to stop you. And then your job is to go, right, thanks for the information. Thanks for these uncomfortable feelings, right? Because you've got my attention, which is great. Now you've got my attention, I'm going to tell you. And now it depends on your beliefs. So if you now say, you know, all these people are just like me, which is true, we're all the same. So most people don't want to go in the room if they don't know anybody, all right? Because we all have chimps. So if you start saying, right, let me just say, at the end of the day, I'm just going to be me. If people like me, that's great. If they don't, that's, you know, it's not a big deal. You know, I can just be me. And if that's what you want, I don't know, if that's what you tell me, then we work on those belief systems. And what the computer does is start storing them, and it will start to override the chimp because it speaks to the chimp. So I started doing a lot of work on this and saying it's crucial what's in that computer, but it's also crucial to know who you are. You are not your chimp. And people muddle this up. So I get so many people, which is quite, I don't know, disturbing to me because I don't like to see people distressed, telling me I'm an anxious person. And that's scientifically nonsense. What you're saying is my machine is prone to anxiety. My machine is prone to giving me low self-esteem. That's a very different proposition.
Mhm.
If I can push this, because I'm on my hobby horse, I warned you. If I push it, what I do with people, I ask them at the start, so we don't go into the devil in the detail, get a blank piece of paper. I love the blank piece of paper exercise because it's based on neuroscience. And what I do is I say, write down all the characteristics you really would like to be. And people write, they do different things. When I was working with psychopaths, they did not write compassion. They didn't write integrity. Most people will write compassion, integrity, confidence, at peace with myself. You write that list. And when you've written it, I say, put your name at the top. You've just described yourself. That is you. And then people say to me, Steve, I'm not calm. I'm not confident. And I say, let's get the science right. You are, because you're in charge. So you're going to say, right, I'm choosing calmness. I'm choosing confidence. What now happens is your chimp brain intercedes and starts colouring the picture presented to the world. So what we now have is not to get you to be confident. You're already confident. We have to stop the interference. That's a very different proposition because now you can distance yourself and say, right, the problem I have is not me. The problem I have is learning and understanding what my chimp is doing, why it's doing it, and how do I manage it.
Mm.
I really feel if, especially people listening, because it's such a destructive thing to have a poor self-image or low self-esteem, and there isn't any need for it. If you look at the truth, the science, the truth behind it, I can't. If I could neurosurgically remove the chimp and the computer from you, you would be exactly who you want to be. But we can't do that. They're going to be with us for life. The startling thing is when you start to understand this, the chimp is always your best friend. It's trying to help you. It just doesn't know how to get your attention or how to help you. It's never a destructive force in reality, but we perceive it as such. But once you start learning, you can actually use the chimp system and then you become extremely resilient. But the big key point for me is when that blank piece of paper is in front of you, now we know who you are. And partners, close friends, parents will tell you, I know who you are. But I've also seen, if I could use my terminology, when you get hijacked from the chimp, because that's what seems to be happening. Whereas I know the real you, and we do calm down with friends or partners, and they say, I know who you are. You are calm, you're considerate, you're confident, you've got everything you're saying. That is you. But I get that once the chimp moves, you present to the world a different picture.
And so if you are the type of person who thinks, to use your terminology, my computer is predisposed to anxiety or is more likely to have low self-image, how do you reprogram that computer?
Right. Oh, good. Yeah, and this is the key to the work. And I have to say, when I first started doing this, which is a long time ago, the chimp model came out in the 90s. I used it with medical students, and they kept saying, "No, Dr. Peters, you must put this in a book." And I was thinking, I'll be ridiculed. You've got this little inner chimp. But, after a while, I thought, I can't hold back on this, because I was using it with patients and saying just a lot of people came with depression or anxiety, which was not clinical based. It was based on this dysfunction. So I said, you don't need drugs. I'm going to work with you. And I was getting really good results. And credit to the people. It's a skill acquisition. So you've got to take this seriously. It's a bit like learning a language. You've got to do it little by little by little. And so I've had people I've worked with for 10 years, 15 years. And they say, every year you learn more about yourself. Every year you get more depth on what the chimp's doing on the computer. So going back to your question where you say, right, my chimp is anxious. The computer's not anxious, it's neutral. Right, so you've got an anxious chimp. First point is that's normal. It's meant to be, right? And what you're saying is that's the way it communicates with me. Can I make it communicate differently? Some people's chimps communicate with anger. And then they start saying, I'm an angry person, I need anger management. Instead of saying my chimp's communication is always anger. So how do I diffuse that? So let's take anxiety as an example. Anxiety, I don't want to get too nerdy here. I was just going to give big words, but I think
Please.
Well, my favourite bit of the brain at the moment is the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis, right? So
I love that
exactly,
part too. That's
yeah.
so funny. We've got the same favourite part.
So that little nucleus, tiny, has so many functions. One is fear. And I think it's really important that, and we were talking just before we came on air, that I don't want to be politically correct or incorrect. I'm just going to say what's neuroscience. So the bed nucleus gives anxiety because it predicts the future. That's what anxiety is. What could happen? So if we learn to say, right, let's have a look at when we're saying what could happen. Instead of looking at the problem, I could lose my job, let's look at what if it did? Let's diffuse this. Are you an adult or a child? And most people smile and say, well, I'm an adult. That's okay. I'm quite tough on people. How do you want to act then? And they say, okay, like an adult. And then we look and explore what's your belief about an adult? How would an adult deal with this? Because life's going to put us through quite a bit. But we have to start getting a plan instead of just reacting as the chimp will. So we start looking at your fears, your anxieties, and saying, what are your beliefs behind this? And we reprogram the beliefs in the computer. So I say, let's tidy it up. And this is the mind mechanic. Let's start clearing out the beliefs, which are really ridiculous and unhelpful. And as you said, could even have come from childhood. We know that generally speaking, you have a 6-year lag when you see things that's damaging the brain. The good news is nearly all of it can be repaired. And if it can't be repaired, we can overwrite it. So we can get over a lot of things and manage the mind. And I've done this with many people. I'm pleased to say most of them come out in a really good place. So if you said anxiety, the first is acknowledging it's not you. On your list of the perfect you would not write anxious. So it's not you. That's number one. It's nothing to do with you. Your mind's decided that's the message. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now we've got to say, as your chimp, I mentioned the chimp will knock you out when you decide on the donut. It will also do the same with anxiety. It just says, right, and it has the power to do that. So we know there are over 30 hormones and transmitters for the chimp part of the brain to freeze the human. So we can't make decisions. That's why often we act out and think, what was wrong with me? And the answer is you weren't even there. It's frozen you literally. And we can see that. Then we say, right, the chimp does something remarkable now. That chimp brain cannot react or do anything. It takes it less than 1/5 of a second to do this. It sends a message around the brain and it goes right around all the areas of the brain, which are all your memory banks and beliefs and values. And it picks up all this, and this is the advice the computer's now giving it. So if the computer is programmed correctly, it will stop the chimp in its tracks. So we can't control the chimp, but we can program the computer to manage it. And again, this is tough and it's hard, so I'll try and keep it simple. I could have you saying, Steve, I don't like getting on stage in front of the public. I get anxious if I've got to do a talk to 200 people. And I get another young woman who's also saying the same, but for different reasons. So I have to work with you and say, what are your beliefs? And then I might say, do you know that research shows 80% of the audience, it doesn't matter who gets up and speaks, are on side. 80% will like you. In fact, 20% love you before you speak. And that's true of all of us. because they're nice people who want you to succeed and they know it's tough. So they admire you just for getting up. If you know that, you might say, Steve, that really resonates with me and that makes me get on stage to help people. But the other woman might say, no, it doesn't resonate at all. That really hasn't settled my chimp. So the uniqueness when I'm working with you is to find what are the key beliefs which are valid and truthful that resonate with you specifically, and they're unique to you. And this is why it's hard to write this out, because I can't give 5 tips. I say, try and work out what belief will really settle your chimp. So I work with you to find, if you're anxious or your chimp's anxious, 5 beliefs that are going to stop your chimp from being anxious. And I don't know what they'll be. I can test out a lot of common beliefs that a lot of people go, that really helps me. For example, I'll give you a simple one. A common one that people like is, will this matter in an hour? Will it matter in a week? That's a very common one people use. So it's as simple as that. It's not complex. And if you think that works, then you need to start your day with that. So I ask people, this is skill-based now, sit on your bed in the morning, ask people to work with me for 5 minutes every morning. And you go through these beliefs and you say, right, is it going to matter what happens today in a week, in a year? 99% of what happens today is irrelevant in a week's time. Even what we think is important, we realize it isn't. In a week, we won't remember it. So if you've got that, that can keep coming unconsciously throughout the day to your chimp, because the brain works at an unconscious level. So what I found people say, it's really strange. I've done the 5 minutes on my beliefs. The day doesn't seem as stressful. I'm actually going through the day and thinking things that bother me, I didn't seem to react to, because what they're explaining scientifically is my chimp was about to, but within a 1/5 of a second, the computer stopped it. That's quite heavy. Did that make sense?
No, that does make sense. I have a few questions.
Yep.
In terms of working out those
Beliefs
that you have,
Yes.
that mean that your chimp acts a certain way,
Yeah.
how do you work out what those specific ones are? Because I feel like a lot of us have them, but maybe are deeper ingrained and we're not so aware of where that belief comes from.
It's a really good point, and it's a common one. I've a small company, and the mentors often come back and they say to me, it's finding them. So there are ways of doing this. And one is, whenever you feel uncomfortable, there's a belief there, which I call the gremlin, which we need to turn over and change it over. So we need to find these. So, for example, I don't know, we don't want to do a therapy session on you in front
We can
of
do a
others.
therapy session, I don't mind.
What would be something you would fear? I mean, would it be getting on stage, or would you relish that?
I'm fine with on stage.
Right, I'm going to stop you then. And we're going to say, why would you be fine on stage? What beliefs are you walking on with that you're probably not even aware of?
As in positive beliefs?
Yeah, well, clearly, because you're saying, I'm not bothered. Whereas a lot of listeners say, blimey, I couldn't do that in front of 500 people. What's your belief about you or what you're about to do?
I think I'm generally comfortable with delivering or knowing that I can talk about something until the end of time.
Right.
And I think there are probably parallels with how I act on the everyday. I'm the type of person who doesn't want there to be an awkward silence, and therefore is, whether it's starting
I'm going to
conversation
guess. So,
or-
and again, this is what I have to, if I'm working with you, I guess,
Yeah.
and you go, yeah, it's true, actually.
Yeah,
Do you believe that everyone in the audience is going to love what you say?
absolutely not.
Good. So now I'm going to say, what would you feel about the ones who don't like it?
I'd love to say that I wouldn't care. I'm sure I would care. I
Right.
think rationally I would probably either not think about them or think, well, that's statistically assumed that
Perfect.
That would be.
So what you see when you went on stage, you had what I'd already said. You had this idea, you can't please everybody. And if I'm going on stage, these are beliefs I think are in your head. If I go on stage, there will be some people who don't like what I say. But they're just like that. Or they might be decent, but I've maybe not got it across well. But you're confident to go on stage because you have that in your head. And you're saying, and you've got another belief here, I can deal with it. You said, I rationalized it, I can deal with it. Whereas another girl will say to me, I haven't got that belief, to be honest. I don't think I could deal with it, the criticism. So that could be a problem. What are people thinking? I don't believe I can get the audience on board. Whereas you're confident, like, I can talk, right? And you've done it. So you think, yeah. But you did have another safety net saying, I can deal with anything that's negative.
Right.
Well, a lot of people haven't got that. So this is where I'd go back and say, and it may not resonate with them, adults deal with anything. As an adult, you can deal with anything in life. You know, that's what adults do. Children can't, and chimps definitely can't. So the chimp doesn't believe it can deal with life, which it can't. So it's being truthful. But you're not a chimp. You're an adult and you're a human being. And you're saying as an adult and a human, I can deal with life. Like you said, it may be uncomfortable. You have another belief there. And your belief is sometimes life's uncomfortable, but you can distract. So you also had a plan to deal with it. So you can see how another girl may not have that belief or a plan. And then she might say to me, how does she distract? Because I can't just ignore it. It keeps coming back and back and back. And that's because, again, she may have this belief that I have to please everybody. So it's very unique to the person in front of me, but your positive stance on getting on stage was built around what I call the autopilots. These are really truthful beliefs. Some of them, it's life. Not everyone's going to like me. They're not all that positive. What they are truthful statements, but you added, I can deal with it.
Right.
So give me an example where you don't think you'd be
Well, I was
comfortable.
about to say, I think that the conversely to that is actually probably more, I'm generally very used to social media, but I'd say I'd probably be more sensitive to those people that wouldn't like it on social media than I would if I was standing up on a stage, which feels rationally ridiculous considering there are going to be more people and that they didn't turn up there in order to hear you speak or whatever it might be. And I'd say that I would be worse at dealing with that. I don't know whether that's because it would be more visible to me rather than,
right.
I can't see
I'm going to
two
make
people
a
in the
guess.
audience.
That's it. I'm guessing. So what strikes me is when we interact with people in the room, they get to know us a little bit, and it's much easier to like someone, you get to know them a little bit. We do this a lot in team building. If I asked you if you're part of my team and I say, what's your dream in life? When you share that dream, I get to know you, and it's very hard to attack you because I think, oh, hang on. She's got these dreams and I might share them. When we're on social media, we have no control and no influence. We just go out there. So now you've lost that control in the room of actually interacting and engaging your audience so they can get to know you. They don't know you're anonymous. So there's a different setting on social media. And we know, again, it might help you to know that the people who are caustic on social media are caustic with everybody. They're unpleasant. That's why they call them the trolls. They're unpleasant people who enjoy, and it's hard for the rest of us to understand this, they enjoy upsetting people. They enjoy sniping. It's cowards. It's cowardly. And they often have pseudonyms rather than the real name. So it's cowardly action, but unfortunately, we have to accept they are in our society. What we need to know is 90% of people are decent human beings. And 90%, unfortunately, don't actually press the button to say like or give a positive remark. So generally speaking, the silent majority are the positive ones, and the vocal ones, unfortunately, contain many of the trolls. So we have to say what I'm reading on social media is disproportionate. It's disproportionate to what the actual true reading is for the population. So it could help you if you reflect on that, and then we look at the evidence and you think, actually, I can see now 2 things I've given you. There'll always be trolls. Don't let them own your happiness, So you're coming across, I don't know, I've just met you. You're coming across as a fairly assertive woman who knows which way up is, which is great. Yeah. And I think you would have the ability to just go, you know what? I'm taking my happiness back. You would use that well, I believe, because you're someone who will take hold and move with it. So whereas, some girls or men that I work with wouldn't be able to do that. So again, this is why I'm looking at you and thinking, I've got to get to know you, because I don't. When I know you're a machine, right? So I can predict, but I can't predict you. So I need to interview you and do the mind mechanics and understand what have you got in that computer and what has your chimp put in that I'm going to have to dig and show you. And then we get to know you. So if you then said to me, I do struggle, Steve, with social media, that's something I'd like to look at. Now we can start going into the detail and so let's step back and see what it is all about and what are the differences between an audience. And we go into detail now.
Yeah. No, that's incredibly interesting. And I think that one of the things around that, like, that really stumps me is the fact that actually I would rather that someone who spent time in a room with me make a judgment on who I am, slash, whether they like me, whatever it might be, versus the irrational assumption that someone who's seen me and made a snap judgment, or even just criticism, whatever it might be, I don't know why that would ever be weighted the same mentally in my head. Like, there's a very big difference to a friend saying, oh, I thought you really acted badly there and I didn't appreciate how you did that, or even someone who you spent some time with and you know that they've taken time to work out, whether.
Well, that's the key. That's exactly what you're saying is, if you think when you're with me a long time, you think, well, he's got to know me now. And your assumption is, which is good, because 90% of people are nice people. So once I get to know them, I like them. So there's a lot of people I like. I just need to dig and get to know them. And being in the world I'm in, if they don't present a good face the first time and they may be annoyed about something and you think, oh, this man or woman's a bit tetchy, I think, yeah, there's probably a reason. So I give them a second go.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. When I'm with the audience, I can do that in the room. They can get to know me. They have time. Social media doesn't give you that. It's snap decisions. So what you're really saying to me is, I don't feel it's representing me. That's what you've just told me. And I'm saying realistically, it can't. It can't. So you must accept that you may put a picture out there that you're not happy with. And that's what's agitating. You think this is unfair because this isn't representative of me, or at least it's a bit of me, but you haven't got the bigger picture. And so they come in and criticize something. You think, well, if you give me a chance, I would have shown you that side of me as well. So again, it's a snapshot, isn't it? Social media.
Yeah. No, 100%. And its very nature is to only represent that, because you cannot represent more than a certain amount in terms of that. I'd like to know, you say that, for example, if your chimp reacted with anger to something,
Yes.
or reacted with jealousy or whatever it might be, then that's obviously your chimp.
Yeah.
You also say that it's not an excuse.
Yes.
How do we recognize this without using it as an excuse?
Okay, because what we tend to do as humans is we allow our chimps to become angry. Let's take anger. And then we rationalize it. The reason I'm angry is you said this. Right, well, it may be true. It may be true, but that's not helpful. Because if I say to you now, do you want to be angry? Is that the response you want? Now, some people might say yes. We paint the picture, and people often paint the human as this really angelic creature and the chimp as the devil almost. And I'm saying some people's humans are not nice. The chimps are lovely, So not every human's nice. We've mentioned them already. But if you said to me, Steve, I don't want to be angry. So if something upsets me, I would ask you, how do you want to respond to that? How do you want to respond? And one of the reasons some people get angry is they don't know any other words to use. So I like to use emotional training, vocabulary, and say, give me a different word to angry. So let's say you've got a friend who makes a really unkind remark and you feel this anger because that's what your chimp communicates with. We're going to educate your chimp and say, what's an alternative to anger? So do you want to have a go? This is what I do.
Yeah.
What's an alternative emotion to anger when somebody said something that's...
Compassion.
Yep, that could be a good one. I'm going to be compassionate. They've made a mistake or they've said something they probably don't mean. You start programming. I will rehearse this now. And you get it in your computer, which needs quite a few goes to implant it because it's forming networks in your brain, literally. So, and then you may find, after you've done it a while, a friend makes a caustic remark and you say, Steve, it was amazing. I just say, I'm sorry, obviously you're upset about it. I didn't personalize it. I didn't get angry. I changed. I got compassionate. So you gave me an alternative. So when we do this, usually when I do anger, we can get about 30 words, which is amazing because you demonstrated, which is true, is it's not easy, this work. But when you start working with it, it gets better. You become skilled. So for example, I often use disappointment as an alternative because that's an easy one. So if somebody says to me, you can say, no, I'm angry, but I'm disappointed. Now, it sounds semantic, but I'm looking at neuroscience. Whenever you express yourself by saying, I am angry, your brain will pick that emotion up because that's what you've told it. So it will reinforce that anger. Whereas if you sound disappointed, your brain will then give a different emotional pattern because you're programmed to be disappointed now. So what we say is quite crucial. It will dictate. So not only do we speak from emotion, we can speak to get emotion. A simple example, and you say, if I asked you and I wouldn't, give me 5 really big disappointments in your life, you're going to feel miserable at the end of it. But that's because you've created it. So there's a truth in that. There's a two-way process. If I ask you to give me 5 real highlights that you've done in life, you'll probably feel a lot better. So I do this work with young children where it's facial expression. We know that if you, it's bizarre, but it's true, if you force yourself to smile, even though you don't want to, it actually makes your brain feel better. People say, yeah. And it goes the other way. If I feel good, then I smile. The face is intricately linked and it works both ways, which is bizarre. So again, if you ask someone to go around and be sad and look sad all the time, they'll start experiencing it. So in some people that's strong, in others it doesn't. It doesn't. Everyone's unique. So that may not be true for the person.
So this is incredibly, incredibly interesting. And I feel like everyone could benefit a lot from some time with you.
I love to reach everyone.
Obviously, not everyone can have access to a world-renowned psychologist, psychiatrist. Sorry.
Yeah, the psychologists
bad.
might get
Yeah.
uptight. I'm not a psychologist.
What actionable advice would you have? I know that obviously it's incredibly unique to the person,
Yeah.
but what tools can someone employ in order to kind of hack their brain as you talk about it?
I think because everyone's unique, some people won't relate to what I'm saying and they don't like the chimp model, and that's fine. It's not for everybody. It's a model. Some people will work with mindfulness. Some people work with hypnotherapy, even massage therapy. There's a lot of things out there. So the first thing I'd say is really question whether you really want to improve your psychological health. And if the answer is yes, start exploring and say, right, what resonates with me? What really works for me? And it can be some simplistic stuff. We don't have to go too heavy. I've come in as a neuroscientist and I'm just saying that's my world. And I'm trying to make it simple and almost fun, but there's a real seriousness to this because obviously emotions can destroy us if we don't learn to understand and manage them. So I'd be saying to people, first decide on whether it's worth it, and then don't try and go overboard. My advice is don't do that because that generally is the chimp brain trying to be over enthusiastic, and then you'll end up feeling like you failed again. Instead say, well, I'm going to spend just 5 minutes a day reflecting, because whichever model you use, that's going to help. You know, in my world, I know scientifically, if you stop and say, right, let me just pause and think things through and get some perspective and step back, learning perspective is really crucial to the brain. If you get that, in 5 minutes in the morning, it can change your day. So I'm saying that go with a model that works for you, but make your mind up whether it's worth actually spending some time. I'm always amazed when I ask people, how important do you think your psychological health is? And universally, people say it's crucial. Interesting psychopaths will say it isn't. Interesting. But don't then assume you're a psychopath if you think it isn't. All right. It doesn't work that way. But if you say yes, and most people say it's so crucial because it affects everything, your relationships, your work, everything. And I ask them, how much time do you spend a day on it? And the majority of people say none. And that beggars belief. So I'm asking people to rationalize and stop and say, is it worth it? And if it is, find something that you think this resonates with me. And then start on that. But do it in small chunks. Don't put, I'm going to do an hour a day, because then you just feel like you're failing.
And before we finish, I want to speak a little bit about, you've worked with world-class athletes. You've spent a lot of time with them working on their brains overall, and kind of how they, how they do what they do so incredibly. What would you say makes these top, I wouldn't even say 1%, far less than 1%, brains, people, athletes, different to the rest of patients you see?
I don't think I'm only one man, one experience. All right. I haven't seen anything universal other than hard work. I haven't seen it. The personalities of the elite athletes, and I've had the privilege of working with about 30 Olympic sports and various athletes, which you've got to learn about because I don't know a lot of the sports. But it's no different to working with doctors or teachers or people who run businesses. It doesn't matter who I work with. I think the uniqueness of the person is what counts. So I will get athletes who don't have any confidence. I'll get athletes who are overconfident. I'll get athletes who are very driven and organized. I'll get athletes who are disorganized and not that driven. And their talent carries them. So I wouldn't like to put them in a box. I would say I haven't seen a characteristic feature other than somebody who's saying, right, this is what I want to do, and then sticks with it for most of the time. But some athletes succeed when they don't train that well. They're just so gifted. So I wouldn't want to put them in a box. I'd go back to my original thing. You're unique, and it's about getting to know you. And what makes you tick, what's going to help you to get quality life, what's going to make you so that you manage what I'm calling the chimp system, understand it and make it your best friend. How do you get your computer programmed so the mind is on side now instead of what appears to be attacking you? So that's my approach. And elite athletes, it's the same. So we mentioned before going on air Ronnie O'Sullivan, who's very public and tell the world everything. And I was with him yesterday, and I've worked with Ronnie 10 years, and he's a lovely guy. And he works very hard on this. He finds it hard to do. It's a skill. So he'll have good days and not so good days. But overall, he's moved forward massively. So if you look at him, he's phenomenal in his field. I mean, it's ridiculously phenomenal. He's obviously, everyone says he's a one-off. But if you said, what characteristics does he have? I'd be struggled to put them in. I can't give you what people want me to say. They're dedicated. They're really organized. That's just not true. Ronnie does what Ronnie does, and he does well with it. And so we have good and bad days. But overall, he's doing really well.
And I want to talk about that quickly, just obviously in the recent Ronnie O'Sullivan documentary, there's a scene where you coach him through kind of a panic attack type moment. What types of things are you saying to someone in those?
I haven't seen the documentary. I wasn't aware, but again, I'd say this. Let's say I'm working with you. I'm being extreme here to drive a point, and you got yourself into whatever. Your chimp's anxious and it's being ridiculous, and it's ridiculous and you can't stop. There'll be one day I'll think, knowing Grace for what she's like, I need TLC here. I need to say, sit down, let's coffee. Don't, and I'd talk to you that way. But however, if I got to know you and I'm thinking, we don't have this is the wrong way, I would then confront you. And I would then be a bit more stern and say, right, you tell me what you want and tell me how you're going to do it. And I won't tolerate it then. So for me, working with your chimp is what I'm doing, not you. It's like a child in a way. Some days you've got to be firm and say, no, we're having no nonsense. Other days you think, hang on, a bit of compassion. Because they've been through quite a bit today. So let's get them on board with compassion. So I can be, I wouldn't say confrontational. I think firm is more like it, and challenge people. But I'm challenging them to manage their chimp. And usually I'm challenging their chimp.
And how does someone employ that on their own?
Okay. Again, ideally, you want someone to be independent of me. You don't want them so they have to come running to me. So I'm trying to show people how to acquire this skill. And as I keep on saying, I would work with you to say, right, how would you like to manage yourself if your chimp's being anxious? What would you like to do? And you might say, I would like to distance myself, get some space. And I say, let's practically how you do that. And if you're stuck where you can't distance yourself physically, how do you distance yourself mentally? But you've told me what you want. You might come back and say, it didn't work, Steve. And I say, can I give you an alternative? And then we might look at this, like I said, retraining, stop using the word anxiety. Because often when people say, I've got anxiety, it isn't. They've got adrenaline, which is a very different thing. So I'll now give you a little bit of science behind it. You might say to me, that resonates. Now I've got it. Adrenaline will make my mouth go dry and I'll tremble and my heart's racing. But that's not anxiety. So if we change the wording, it might work. It might not. Then we try again. So again, it's the uniqueness of working with a person in front of me, and they'll tell me, no good, try again. Or they'll say, that really resonates. And then when we get something that resonates, we write it down. I like people to keep notes, and then they can remind themselves and think, yeah, move forward. But over time, people change, because what's happening is they're managing their chimps or getting the chimps on board. So they're becoming themselves, which is the you without the interference from the chimp or computer, or with support from them.
And so how do you tell the difference between, in that example, the anxiety and the adrenaline?
Okay. Anxiety, as I said before, has a worry about what's going to happen. Adrenaline is in the moment. It's not actually got those attached thoughts or predictions, which I can't cope or I'm not going to, or something's going to go wrong. Adrenaline is where you might say, for example, an athlete competing is a good example. We expect them when they're about to go into the Olympic arena with millions of people watching, we expect a boost of adrenaline to come up. Going on stage, most people will say, I get butterflies. That's not anxiety. You're not feared. Your body's getting prepared. So it's releasing a lot of adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol. It's meant to do that so you can welcome it, because we know that that boost of hormones subsides within 2 or 3 minutes. It doesn't last long. So, once you get up there on stage, you're okay. Or once you get into the Olympic arena, athletes say it just dissipates. You forget it. So we have to say, during that time, what's our expectation? Get a realistic expectation. It may or may not happen, but if it does, interpret it correctly. It's only adrenaline. There isn't a fear here. It's a physiological experience, which is meant to happen, and it's a good thing.
And what if there is a fear?
Then that's different. So now we've got a person saying, so now we explore that. And I do have what I call a mental warm-up for athletes. So it's a 5-stage warm-up, and in that we address these, but we do it not on the day of competition. We do it like in an Olympic cycle, 4 years to go we start. And then we are primed with this. So we have a definite working process so that we know what their chimps will fear. One of them will be, I might be letting my parents, my coach, my family down. One will be, I don't want the audience to think I'm terrible. I need to prove myself. These are all unhelpful beliefs. So if it's something like letting my family down, we need to explore that well before, because it's obvious to the rest of us. The family are going to say, we'll be disappointed if you don't get your medal or whatever. They're never going to say you've let us down. That's never going to happen. Everyone who's in, 90% of people, whether athletes or not, are always trying. We're animals that try. So you could never down yourself as long as you've done your best effort. And now we're going to a different world and we're running out of time. And that's values, because we never touch them. And that's really a stabilizer for peace of mind, which is different to success and happiness. So we're going in a different area now.
So can you tell me, just before we finish, what is that 5-step mental warm-up you use for Olympic athletes?
What I try and do is explain to them that the brain has rules. I mentioned this. So the way the mind works is the chimp always goes first. So what we first need to do is address the chimp, and that's going to be unique to the person. What is their chimp like? And sometimes they're unpredictable. You get on stage one day and you normally expect your chimp to get anxious and it worried or adrenalized. Then suddenly it doesn't do it. And you're saying, oh, that's a bit odd, right? So we get to know our chimps. When you've dealt with the chimp system, the human actually interferes when it comes to sport. And in fact, presentations, sometimes it doesn't. It depends what you're asking me to do to work with. We get rid of the human as well, because when you're on stage, the computer mode takes over. Most of what you say, you already know what's coming. So the computer's talking through you, and it's fast. It'll be eloquent. It'll find the words. Only if someone in the audience stops you and go, what do you mean by that? Does the computer stop and say, I don't have an answer now. And now you have to speak. So you're now using different systems. So my mental warm-up would be deal with the chimp first, deal with the human, get the computer warmed up, which we need to do. When we've done the computer warmed up, then we've got to go into process-driven mode for sport, because it's process that'll do it. Very much like you on stage. I don't know whether you're presenting something or whether you just talk. Again, I can't give an answer unless I know what you do, but we're looking at the process of what you do. And then it's learning to stay in that mindset throughout the presentation. And then I do a mental debrief afterwards so that we leave you in a good place. We don't go away and then not sleep that night worrying about what you said or what you didn't say. We learn to debrief the mind so it goes, okay, all is well. Very complex,
complex, but incredibly interesting. And I think that, the way you talk about the chimp as a whole, as you say, it might not work for some people, but for me, it really helps to solidify which area, is my reaction to something versus my actual response to something. And I think that the more and more I get a hold over that as a whole, like I consider myself quite a I'd like to think I'm the type of person who responds rather than reacts
Yeah,
generally.
yeah.
Um,
Let
but
me
I
just
d-
again help you, because if you're in the therapy, I'd be saying to you always respond. Your chimp always reacts.
right.
So it isn't that you do want it. You're in chimp mode. You have to react. That's how it works. It can't respond. By respond, we mean you stop and think, right, it is what it is. What's my plan? That's what the human does. We accept the situation, not roll over. We accept what's presenting. Then we work how we're going to work with it. Whereas the chimp, it usually doesn't accept, because it writes the script first. It says, this is what should happen. And if it doesn't, then it gets upset, angry, anxious, because it's saying this is what should happen. Whereas humans, we go, it is what happened. Whatever's happened, let me take a deep breath and let me say, what's my plan? So you always, when you're in human mode, if we can get you there and keep your chimp quiet or on board, you'll always respond to life. You can learn to respond just by moving system. So it's what I teach is how to move systems and how to manage systems. There are times being in the chimp mode's the best thing. The chimp gives us humor. Without humor, it's a pretty dull world. So it's not a negative force, it's a positive. It just needs to be understood and managed, what it's trying to do with us.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I just hope people got that. If last point as a doctor, just to say, if somebody's not well, because obviously depression as an illness is probably the most prevalent, then the model will work. But clearly, I'd advise anyone listening, if they're not in a good place, just get assessed, because sometimes you can have a clinical illness without realizing it.
Right.
And when we treat people, then I'm not against medication. When it's appropriate to give it, that can put your brain back into its normal state.
Right.
And then you can use this model, because we're all still dysfunctional.
Right.
But I'm just saying, as a doctor, don't try and deal with something if you think you're actually not well.
Yeah.
So definitely go and get assessed by a clinician.
No, I think that's really, really valuable. And I think always that discrepancy between a chemical imbalance that, might give a clinical issue rather than...
then what I call dysfunction, which we're all prone to. And all dysfunction means is our chimp brain is taking over and we're getting a bit frustrated with it, thinking, why is it doing this? And how do I stop it?
Well, thank you so much. This has been incredibly interesting. I feel like
thank
we could
you.
talk for hours.
I know I'm going to say this, I'm going to push, but it's something I want to help people is I wrote A Path Through the Jungle as a book so that people could work on this themselves. Because you mentioned that, and I didn't want to push it because I don't like advertising, but I often get emails, people chase this up and say, what am I supposed to do with this? Where can I find it? So I did A Path Through the Jungle to try and say, a lot of people are private. They don't want to meet me and tell me their figures, but they want to take what knowledge I've got or experience. So I tried to give that as a course. People can actually work through it steadily, but it's heavy. I have to tell you, it's heavy. Yeah.
That's great. I think that's
it's hopefully very productive.
I'm very excited to dive into it.
But thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.